All right, film enthusiasts and filmmakers, we are here. Marcus Baker, filmmaker, writer, director, and founder of Seattle Film Society. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's an honor. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you, man. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah.
And I really want to hear your connection to the idea of being a filmmaker and the practice of being a filmmaker, how you might be wrestling with it. Turning it over to you.
I've wanted to be a filmmaker since I was a teenager. I think I'm 32, going on 33 now. And I think like a lot of people of my generation, my kind of activation point was seeing The Dark Knight in theaters. I saw that movie, a gazillion times, and it really changed what I thought a film could do. I hadn't really thought about filmmaking as a career or as a pursuit or what it could say or be about. And that film really kind of changed my brain chemistry in that way. It really forced me to think, oh, a film doesn't have to be this kind of narrow-minded, like stuffy sort of thing. It can be popcorn entertainment. It can be a political commentary. It can be all these sorts of big things. That came out when I was 15, and from that point on, it really was about trying to become a filmmaker. A lot of my way into becoming a filmmaker was through film criticism. After I saw The Dark Knight, the first thought that I really had was this burning desire to know why that movie had made me feel so strongly. And I was searching high and low for an answer, and I found the answer through reading film criticism, through which, was explaining to me how film language works, which explained to me how screenwriting worked. So all these sorts of, the foundational elements of making a film. A lot of my early kind of connection to film came through learning to think about how film functioned, how it worked, what made it work, what made a scene work, all those sorts of things. I didn't really go to film school. I did go to my local community college. I took some film courses there. Um, and then I kind of just got started working in the industry. I worked freelance for a couple years. I did that for in Seattle. I lived in LA for a little while as well and freelance down there. I should mention I live in Seattle now. I'm from Seattle originally. I lived in LA for about 3 years, and then I moved back to Seattle in 2020. When I was in LA, I transitioned to just having a day job. I got a job working at Starbucks, and it wasn't anything fancy, but it gave me the time I wanted to focus on my writing, to focus on my own projects. And then during COVID, I kind of just realized, I loved LA, but like I didn't necessarily feel a huge need to be there. A lot of the filmmakers that I was really getting into at that time, they weren't from LA. They weren't even necessarily from major cities, or at least not major North American cities. And so I felt, I could go home, I could come back to Seattle and continue building my career here, which is what I did. In the couple years that I've been back, I've made two short films. I founded the Seattle Film Society, which is a filmmaker-run organization dedicated to organizing, cultivating, and celebrating our film community. I did that with six other filmmakers, and it's grown to, a pretty expansive organization. We have, a slew of volunteers now. We've got a Discord. We've got multiple screening events, all this kind of stuff. And all of this has grown out of a love for filmmaking, a love for the craft of filmmaking, for the joy of collaboration, from all of these sorts of things that I think are inherent to making art. And now I feel like I've kind of worked my way out of short films, and I feel like with the Film Society, that's given me a lot of confidence in myself as a creative and my own ability to organize and make things and produce things and that sort of thing. And I'm working towards my first feature.
That's awesome. That's a really dedicated story, to what you're doing, and it takes a lot of guts to follow that path.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing all that. The film we're going to be talking about today is called 100. It's a short about a mother-daughter relationship and the narrative. Could you set up the storyline for that and I'll fill it in from
Yeah, yeah, of
there?
course. Yeah. So 100 is a short film that I wrote and directed in 2023. It came out in 2023. It's about a daughter who is trying to move out and she lives with her mother. Her mother is short on rent. And the mother asks her daughter for money to help cover the rent. And it's sort of about the internal conflict there of this person who's on the way out and this person who's trying to keep someone in a say a rather difficult emotional relationship.
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of times it might be casually called codependent relationship, but it sounds like the daughter wants out. It's a single mother, and the nature of their relationship is seems to be loving one. I mean, of course, they generally care about one another, but there's also some usury going on. The mother needs the daughter, and whenever there's a role reversal like that, it's really confusing. It creates a
Yeah,
really confusing
yeah,
relationship. And, I've had some experience with knowing friends who have been in kind of that predicament. But whether it's the confusion of a mother-daughter relationship or it's a confusion of any other kind of relationship when one person's kind of conditionally loving, that's what I really saw as a universal theme in this film is there's this love that is conditional based on, well, do what I'm asking you to do,
yeah,
help me, and if you don't, if you take care of yourself, right, this honoring yourself versus the obligation that you have to another person in a relationship, what happens and
yeah,
where's the balance, where is one person being selfish and whereas one person really needs to make a break, and what are the obligations? So in that kind of thematic context, do you have some more to add to that?
No, I think that's dead on. When I was writing this film, we were kind of coming out of COVID for one thing, and so that sort of thing was kind of looming over it, and the kind of feeling of it. During COVID, I had gotten really into watching the films of Jane Campion. Her films are very much about uh, intense personal relationships. Um, and so that was very much kind of in the back of my mind as well. And the third part was I'd kind of gone through a breakup. When you're going through a breakup, in that specific scenario, there was a lot of stay, should I go, that kind of thing. What is a valid reason to leave? What is an effective reason to go? Um, and what does it look like to leave a situation when there is no perfect reason or there is no perfect time? All of those things are certainly in there. And I really wanted to, with 100, boil my process down. I really wanted to make a film that was about one issue and it was about two people on different sides of the same issue and they're fundamentally at odds. And so what does that look like? And as I said, I think at the time I was working at Starbucks, it's not a job that paid super well. It was really difficult to continue pursuing filmmaking when you're not making enough, when you're barely making enough to live on, or you're flat out not making enough to live on. It's called 100 because the mother's asking for $100 to help cover rent. And when you're in that scenario, when your economic situation is so dire, $100 can feel like the end of the world. $50 can feel like the end of the world. $10 can feel like the end of the world. And I really wanted to explore the way that like $100 can be both a lot of money and no money at all.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's a really important point. And it's the dire straits kind of highlight the intensity of this relationship where there's a finite resource. How do you share the finite resource that you both need, right? And
Yeah,
and and with the nature of love. So now we're talking about the nature of love, and the nature of
yeah,
love is an
yeah.
infinite resource. Like it's a
Mhm,
giving, right?
mhm.
And then when there's a taking, that is no longer a loving gesture. Whether it's the dire straits of money or whatever else is like that kind of dramatic tension that's limiting, that's the bone the two dogs are fighting over. With regards to the meaning and the message of the film in this context of love and the finite resources, and like you're saying, like when is it right to leave? Well, I guess when the love's kind of not there, when the
Yeah,
people aren't giving to the
yeah,
relationship, giving to each other, ready, willing, and able to serve one another in any capacity that's needed. That, here I am for you, as I would be for myself, right? But you got to be there for yourself first. Within that framework, how do you see the meaning making of this film?
I think that's almost the kind of main dramatic question of that film, you know? The idea of at what point does it become clear that like if your friend comes to you and is like, "Hey man, I'm in a bad situation, like can you give me $100? I'll pay you back." And they pay you back. That's your trust. That's you lending them their trust, and then that trust is restored. If someone is coming to you repeatedly and repeatedly violating your trust and repeatedly, taking advantage of you, at what point do you recognize and set a boundary ultimately?
Right.
And that's so much of what the film is really about. To me, that's a lot of the kind of meaning, as it were, is it's a film about trying to set a boundary in a very difficult circumstance. Economically, obviously, but personally, especially if it's like a parent that you love, you might love your parent, you might have a good relationship with your parent. It might be easy to set boundaries, or it might be really hard to set boundaries with those parents. And this film specifically takes a look at a relationship where a mother-daughter relationship where those boundaries are very fluid. I think a lot of this film is really about the sort of struggle to set that boundary when there are so many extenuating circumstances that would lead you to talk yourself out of setting one, you know?
I love that, man. And I see that in my life where if the boundaries aren't being set and you're not taking care of yourself, then um, other relationships suffer.
Yeah,
The relationship that you have yourself, if that is out of alignment and doesn't have integrity, then you're
yeah,
suffering, across the board. It's hard to be there for other people.
yeah.
And if you're not there for yourself. So how is it when love is at stake or being a good daughter, right? You want to be a good daughter. You want to be a good
Yeah,
mom. You want to
yeah,
be a good dad. You want to be a good boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, lover. Good. You want to be
yeah,
good.
yeah.
And when you want to be good,
Mhm.
is conflicting with the idea of taking care of yourself by saying no.
That's kind of the question of the movie is like, because it is totally possible to set a boundary, and maybe set it in the wrong way, set it in the wrong time, in the wrong language, whatever. There's all sorts of ways to do it. Um, But it ultimately, if you're choosing to set a boundary, you're choosing to set that boundary for a reason. Are you setting the boundary for the right reason? And if so, what is that right reason? Within the context of the film, it's a very slow film, and that was intentional. I wanted you to feel the kind of weight of this relationship, and the kind of weight of them thinking and their choices. Film is entirely in real time, and it's about almost 15 minutes long. And I had to argue with my producer about this, but I think you really need, especially those first like 8 minutes, to kind of like have that slow burn turn of the screw to their relationship, where you're starting to get a sense of things ramping up. You're kind of seeing the chess match that's happening. You're seeing this like really tightly wound relationship that maybe doesn't appear that way at first, but like it slowly eases you into it because the daughter is, saying, I don't know. I don't. I want to move out, like all this kind of stuff. And right at the 9 minute mark, the mom turns on her, and the mom is like, you're leaving because you hate me, all this kind of stuff. Um,
Guilt.
and, and it gets ugly, and it gets ugly, it gets manipulative, and I really, again, in structuring the film, in cutting the film, I don't normally cut my own films, but I chose to cut this one because I felt really strongly about needing to cut it myself. I really wanted to carefully build that tension. Because I think going back to your question of how do you be a good person in this situation, and I think the answer is you be as good to the person as you can be, up until you're not allowed to be, basically. And I think especially once the mom turns on her daughter and is like really coming at her, I think at that point in time, the gloves are off, and the mom has laid her cards on the table, and that's when it becomes really clear that like you can't you can't necessarily do this in a nice way. And unfortunately, that does happen sometimes.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to ask you, and you laid it out pretty well. Is like in your own life, now that you've done this film and you've researched it, and it's been an exploratory process internally, you've written and directed it, watched it. When and where, how has it taught you to make better decisions about setting boundaries?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think it really taught me about what it feels like to set a boundary. Because I think like oftentimes for me in my own life, I think like there's the quote that's like people will remember how you made them feel. I can't remember who said it. So often that is what is most important to me, is knowing how something is going to feel rather than simply seeing it, because how something feels is often much different than how it looks. It's an extreme example, but like in action movies, when someone like walks away from an explosion, like yeah, maybe it looks cool, but like it's probably loud as shit. It probably burns their back, all this kind of stuff. And I think in the context of this film, setting a boundary doesn't always feel good. And even like making hard choices for yourself doesn't always feel good in the moment, but you have to kind of take a longer view of like what is going to be the effect on my life, what is going to be the effect on both of our lives. Because also when you're setting a boundary with someone, so much of that does come back to what is the end goal of doing it. If you're worried that money is impacting your relationship with your mother, or someone really important to you in your life, and you want to set a boundary and say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. um that might not necessarily feel good. They might get upset with you, they might lodge an attack at you, whatever, but ultimately you have to believe in your choice, and you have to be willing to stand by it. And I think that can be really, really, really hard. I've definitely experienced that in my own life, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. I think it can feel really tough to do.
I love that. Thank you, Mark Spake, a long-term vision of, how it's
Yeah,
beneficial for both parties, potentially.
absolutely. Yeah.
Filmmaker, writer, director, the movie's 100. Thank you to Kaylee Quinones, who nominated you. Kaylee, thank you.
Yes. Thank you to
And
Kaylee. Yeah.
yeah, and everybody else, we're out on Play It Forward.
Thank you so much.
All right, till next time, everybody. Bye. Peace.